It's Coastal Gardener on the Talk Station FM 107.1. And joining us today, Sean Banks of the Carteret Cooperative Extension Agency, which I always like to throw in the word agriculture, but has something to do with agriculture from time to time. So good afternoon to you.
Good afternoon. Yeah, we do agriculture every once in a while.
All right. We're coming into fall. Hey, we really are feeling the fall weather. I got to ask you about the damage as a result of the hurricane, but are we looking at this as a transition season right now with September, or can we expect more heat coming into the year?
My experience in the 6 or 7 years I've been here in Carteret County is that a lot of times we'll still get 80s and 90s during September, and then it usually starts to cool off in October. But that doesn't mean we can't go ahead and start planting stuff for the fall garden, because if we don't, we won't have enough time for it to ripen before we get a frost, and then it won't be able to ripen at all.
Okay. We're going to talk about that in a few more minutes, and I know you've got some items you want to bring to the table, but let's talk about here for the moment the hurricane, which dumped a lot of water on us. As a matter of fact, roughly 7.5 inches in about a 12-hour time frame.
Right.
That was a lot of water in a very short period of time.
And the good thing about being on the coast is that we have some very sandy soils.
And we have some place for the water to go, too.
Yes, and we have some place for the water to go. Unlike inland, where I've heard that in the Kinston area, they're expecting the river to crest sometime on Sunday. We've already probably had as much high tide as we're going to have. I mean, the tide will still come in, but we'll still get that.
The Tar River, the Neuse River, I don't know about the Cape Fear, but I'm sure the Cape Fear River got a ton of water since it was closer. Wow, I didn't even think about that.
But yeah, they from what last I heard, they were expecting the river to crest in Kinston sometime on Sunday. But here on the coast, right here at the beach in Carteret County, anyway, we've got such sandy soils that a lot of times that the rain's able to absorb down in there. I did get some reports from a couple of the farmers in the county that there was some puddling, puddling is okay, flooding's not so good. And the difference is that puddling is rain that's just fallen down and sat right there, and it wasn't able to absorb into the soil, so it's sitting there on top of the soil, where flooding is water coming from an outside source, like a stream or a river, and then washing up onto the farmland.
That brings up a topic we'll talk here then for a moment, and that having to do with the fact that you have flooding in agricultural communities and, of course, the various pollutants that may come with that.
Right.
What is the process for dealing with that on the part of the farmers? Does it, if the harvesting is time away, is that okay? Will the pollutant products, and I'm thinking the various bacteria that have been problems for farmers as well.
Yeah, and that really depends on the type of crop it is.
Okay.
For example, cotton, which is lower to the ground, flooding that comes in, we're still about a month and a half, 2 months away from cotton harvest. So there's plenty of time for that cotton to be able to absorb any nutrients or any pollutants that may have come in, and enough rain to wash that off of that before it gets harvested and then used. Since it's not being eaten, it's not as not as big of a problem.
Right.
Things like corn that's out there in the field now, that's the field corn. And as long as the corn stayed pretty tight and the water didn't get down inside the ear and make it start to swell up, then the corn will still be harvestable, which my understanding from talking to several other people is that the corn did pretty good through the storm. The wind wasn't enough to blow it over, so the corn should be fine as well. There's probably about a 10 to 15% loss there from the amount of rain that we got.
Wow.
But because the corn is so high and it's field corn, it's going to be fed mostly to cattle anyway. Even any flooding that may have come in there, it wouldn't have gotten on the corn, so it should be fine as well. Things like vegetables for farmers.
Cabbage.
Cabbage, it's far enough away from harvest that it should be okay it should wash off. But things like cucumbers or tomatoes or things that might be down low to the ground, any flooding water that splashes up onto them, that makes that crop unharvestable.
Really?
And so according to NCDA, that would need to be written off as a loss and tilled in. That's why it was good that it was puddling water and not
Okay.
flooding water.
I wanted to confirm that, and I say or mention that we're talking about circumstances of flooding, which we did not have.
We did not have any
But
flooding here in
we did
Carteret
have
County.
puddling, and there's a distinct difference.
Right.
So thanks for clarifying that. We're talking with Sean Banks of Carteret Cooperative Extension Agency, and I keep throwing agriculture in there as we're talking about crops and things of this nature. With all this rain, and one of the comments was made to me, and I'm not asking you to be a hydrologist, although I know you're involved in hydrology. You have to have some knowledge. That the ground was so dry that it absorbed a lot of that water. Did it, in fact, or did it not just to that point puddle and just run off? I'm surprised by that.
A lot of the water was able to, even in places where it puddled, some of it's going to run off because it's on top of the soil and there's a little bit of slope. But a lot of it was absorbed into the soil because we had such a long, 4 or 5 weeks of dry weather, not having a whole lot of water soaking into the ground, a little rain here and there. But it was enough that most of the rain that we did receive was able to be absorbed into the soil and hopefully gets down into the aquifer to fill up all those wells that everybody's using water out of.
And then with that, were we in a drought condition or just in a dry condition? I'm distinguishing between the two.
We were in the first stage of a drought, so not even moderate drought, just a light drought.
Okay. And of course, did the rain sort of satisfy that problem?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure that took care of that. We're no longer in a drought, at least not right here. From reports that I received from other counties right here along the coast, anywhere from 3.5 to 7 inches of rain is what was received from Brunswick County all the way up to through Pender County.
It's interesting. The farther north, the farther you got away from the storm or the center of the storm, the greater the rain, which I found interesting.
That was interesting.
I would have thought just the opposite. But we had a fair amount of rain. It was, although, frankly, that's another question. You can have torrential downpours or a constant, if you will, steady rain, maybe a drizzle. Does the ground and do the plants respond differently to the torrential downpour where there's heavy rainfall in gushes as opposed to a constant ongoing rain?
When we get a downpour, they're going to be able to get a little bit of the water through their leaves, but most of the water is going to get down into the soil, and they'll have to absorb it through the soil. And usually with a torrential downpour where it comes all at once, a lot of times it gets through the soil really quickly too. So if they can't grab it quickly, it's going to be gone. Whereas when we have 12 hours of off and on rain, they're going to have more opportunity to absorb and get fully hydrated.
Any other problems associated with the storm that you've heard? I mean, anything that we might want to watch out for relative to, I might add, pests and maybe a few items like I'm trying to think some bacteria or growths that we have to worry about.
I haven't heard anything in particular. A lot of times, this much rain is going to increase the incidence of leaf spot on plants. So you might want to just keep a look on any of your plants outside. They normally would get leaf spot, like hydrangeas. Of course, I wouldn't worry too much about hydrangeas. They're get leaf spot this time of the year. They're just going to drop the leaves anyway.
Yeah.
But those kinds of things that do get leaf spots on a frequent basis, hydrangeas is one. A lot of our vegetable crops that get leaf spot on them will get some leaf spot from the amount of rain. Roses will be another one. But a lot of these crops or plants are deciduous, so they're going to drop those leaves anyway. So it's not really something to be highly concerned about.
Nothing to be concerned. You mentioned roses. Is there any concern with roses right now, in light of the fact that we're pretty near the end of the season for them, are we not?
Yeah, roses will start going dormant probably October, November time frame. So even if we do get a little bit of leaf spot on those roses, just another application of the leaf spot or the fungicide should take care of that for the most part.
Before we came up with fungicide and all these herbicides, what did these plants do without us? I'm wondering. I mean, how did they even survive?
Real gardeners would get out there and they would loosen those plants up or allow more airflow to go through there to allow the leaves to dry out a little bit quicker.
Gotcha.
And so that would be how they would control the leaf spot on like the hybrid tea roses. They'd make sure that they thin those out through pruning the flowers out on a regular basis and putting them in the vase inside. So pruning the flowers off wasn't just to have pretty flowers, but it was also to keep the plants healthy.
I hadn't even considered that. I'm always nervous about pruning a flower, going, oh, I'm going to hurt this little puppy. So actually, what you're telling me is, and again, obviously, intelligent pruning, which I would not qualify for, but is good for the plant.
Right, just loosening up the plant to allow more airflow through there, sunlight down into the center of the plant. That helps the plant leaves to dry out, and that way you have fewer incidences of leaf spot that get on the plant.
We're talking about rain here for a few more moments with Sean Banks, again, Carter Extension Agency, Cooperative Extension Agency. I've got to get the cooperative in there. I keep throwing agriculture. The issue of lawns right now, because of all that rain, anything that we need to be careful of or concerned about?
Well, the only thing that I know of that you might want to be concerned about is the grass getting too tall, and then when you cut it, you're cutting off so much at one time that you're ending up with piles of grass.
Third.
Yes, 1/3 is all you really want to cut. I've got to raise my mower deck up 1 or 2 notches this week when I cut my grass tomorrow morning.
You're bragging.
I don't know about bragging.
Your lawn is very healthy. I'm impressed.
Well, I've been sick for a little while, so it hasn't gotten cut.
That's what it is. Okay, all right.
I have an excuse, but I'll raise my deck up a notch or two, cut it off so that it doesn't pile up on the grass.
Okay, so we're going to do that in thirds. You want to get it back down to, let's say, 1/2 inch or 1 inch? 1/2 inch.
Well, I have centipede. I like to cut it about 2.5 inches. Right now it's pretty close to 4 inches, so I'll probably raise it up 2 notches, cut it at 3 inches, and then the next time I cut it, I'll cut it down at 2.5 inches, and then the next time at 2 inches, just to slowly get it down.
Okay, but here's my question. Over what period of time? Because you may cut it this week. Do you wait a week and cut it again?
Because the temperatures hopefully will be cooling down, no guarantee on that, but hopefully the grass will slow down on the growth rate. If it doesn't, I'll be out there probably tomorrow and then again on either Wednesday or Thursday and then again the following Monday.
All right, so over a 3 or 4 day period between cuttings. Okay, we're talking with Sean Banks here. We're going to take a quick break. Sean Banks with the Carter Cooperative Extension Agency. Yes, part of the Department of Agriculture, by the way. And he's with us this afternoon here on Coastal Gardener on the Talk Station. It's Coastal Gardener on the Talk Station, FM 107.1. And joining us, Sean Banks, who is recovering from some unknown disease. He had a bad cold. I talked to him last week, and I say cold flu. But he's joining us, Carter County Cooperative Extension Agency. And I really appreciate you making the efforts to come in. How are you feeling?
Well, I'm feeling a lot better than I did last week. A little bit better than yesterday.
You sounded 2 steps from the.
I felt like grave. I was 2 steps from the grave last week.
You sounded it. You really did. All right. So we've gotten through the hurricane. Anything that we should look for, and of course we still have other storms potentially out there. Obviously, we had some limbs that came down, and it did a little pruning for us on our trees.
Right.
Anything we should look for, be concerned about?
Well, I would take a look at the tree and see if you have any limbs that are damaged, that might be broken and just hanging there. Go ahead and cut those off. It's just going to create more problems for the tree later on if they're left there.
Do you cut it at the break, or do you cut it at some place that's like a natural location, maybe like at a fork in the tree where another branch is possibly extending? How do you determine where to cut a limb?
I like to say go back to a fork in the branch.
Okay.
And cut it at that point. And what that does is there's a natural healing spot right there. So if you cut it right there, it's going to heal over a whole lot quicker. If you just leave that nub, then you've got not just the end of the branch where you cut it, but you got that whole nub back to that natural branch that's going to die off, and you're eventually either going to have to cut that or it's going to fall off.
Okay, cut it back from the break, though, for sure.
Yes, cut it back from the break.
All right. Any distance from the break if you've just got a long limb?
If you just have a long limb and it's easier just to cut it right there, just right behind the break, that's fine. Just keep in mind that if it doesn't branch back out from that limb right there close by where it's at, it's going to die all the way back to where it joins the next branch or where it forks out, and you're eventually going to have to cut all that off.
Okay. All right. And are there certain trees we need to be paying attention to?
I would look at anything that has had limbs fall off in the past. I've got a a river birch in my front yard
Mm-hmm.
that quite often will have limbs that break off, and there are a few limbs, really small limbs that are dead up close to the top of the tree, and I can't reach them with my pole pruner. But the branches
That's
that
a
I can
big
reach,
tree.
yeah, it's probably about 40 to 50 feet tall, so it's a tall tree.
So we now know where Sean lives. We just look for that 40-foot or 50-foot river birch. That's a big tree.
It's the only one around. But there are bigger trees in the neighborhood than that one there. But
Okay.
that one's the tallest one in my yard, and it quite often will have dead limbs that are in the tree.
You may have a few other items to talk about. And I apologize, jumped right into these questions, but this is a big question. Has to do with pine trees, and now
Okay.
we're in a storm season. The tall pines have a tendency to break. Now, they also have the tendency at times to fall.
And what I learned during Hurricane Florence is that pine trees aren't inherent; they're not just naturally going to break. It takes a really good heavy wind in order to cause those to break. And so there's really not a reason, unless it's started to lean, or if there was a break somewhere else on the tree,
Okay.
a limb that's already fallen off, to have that tree removed. The only time you really need to have that tree removed is if the wind has pushed it enough to where it's leaning 30 to 45 degrees from upright. Then you might have some concern that it's more likely to fall.
The roots could possibly pull out,
Yeah, they can possibly pull out.
depending
a lot of
on
times,
a lot of rain, a lot of softening.
depends on how soft the soil is. I wouldn't have expected it this time, even with a lot of rain, because it came and went so quick.
It did.
Whereas if we have another really long storm that lasts 2 to 3 days, that would be when I would
Like
worry about
Florence?
trees blowing over. Yeah, like Florence.
Like Florence.
That's when I would worry about trees blowing over and things like that. With a quick storm like this right here, you're more worried about limbs that are already weakened breaking off and falling down, that kind of thing.
Sean, and again, Sean Banks with us with Carter Cooperative Extension Agency. I've talked about all these issues associated with the water and the hurricanes and so forth, and we still have the rest of the hurricane season to get through. As you mentioned at the opening, I asked you about the change in weather. The days are getting shorter. Anything we should start looking to do relative to, say, for example, providing nutrients for some of our plants and trees or yards? What should we do in that regard?
Well, what I would recommend doing, if you haven't already taken a soil sample, take a soil sample and find out what your phosphorus and potassium levels are. If the potassium levels are getting low in your soil, say below 50, around 40 or 30, somewhere in that range, September is a great time to go ahead and add some potash to increase the potassium. And then the potassium will help get those plants through the wintertime and give them a little boost through the winter, so that when they wake up in the spring, come out of dormancy, they have that vitalization, the energy that they need in order to be able to do well.
Any pruning we should start doing now?
I would hold off on any pruning right now, because the tree's going to want to, or the plants, shrubs, whatever it is, they're going to want to be going dormant in October and November. And if you've pruned them now, that gives them about 2 weeks to start putting on some new growth. And then any of that new growth, it has a chance of getting frost damage and getting knocked back anyway.
Well, that's if we have any frost. And
This is true.
Which we haven't had, significant frost in the past 2 years, as I recall. All right. I've jumped in with a lot of questions. Any items that you brought to the table?
Well, the one thing that I really did want to talk about today was that it is time to go ahead and put in your fall vegetables.
Okay.
So if you haven't already done so, put in your fall crops like your cabbage, your collards, your broccoli. You can actually start putting those in mid-August, but right now, early September is a good time to go ahead and get those in. We still have plenty of time for them to get a lot of growth on them before it's time for them to mature, and we start harvesting those usually in late October, early November. Well,
what should we do to prepare for that? In other words, and should we alter where we've been planting those crops?
yes, always rotate your crops from one location to another. Don't ever put the same kind of crop like broccoli in the same spot year after year after year. Move that around in the garden so that it's, even if it's just 4 feet down the row where you haven't had it before, move it down 4 feet down the row, because there are some soil-borne diseases that will survive the summertime or the wintertime and get into the root system.
All right. This is about the end of tomato season, is it not?
This is the end. We're getting close to the end of tomatoes. Tomatoes will actually grow right up until frost, but unless you planted some new tomatoes, a lot of the tomatoes that have been in there all summer are probably getting really, really tired and starting to slow down on their production.
What should we do with those plants?
If you're not going to baby them up until frost, go ahead and remove those, get them out of the garden, and that would be a good location to put your coal crops like your cabbage.
That's
and your
what I was
collards.
wondering about, really.
Yeah.
We've talked about this in the past, that there are certain diseases and pathogens related to tomatoes, but they are unique to tomatoes or nightshade plants, that they're called
Right.
nightshade.
They're the pathogens that survive in the soil or that are unique to the tomato plants are going to affect tomatoes, potatoes, peppers, and eggplant. They're all in that nightshade family. So you don't want to plant those year after year in the
Pardon
same
me,
location.
potatoes are in the nightshade family?
Yeah, they're in the same family. They're in the nightshade family.
Okay, real quickly, quick education. What qualifies as nightshade?
It has a lot to do with the genus and species that they're, or the genus that they're in,
Okay.
or the family. But if you look in some of those seed catalogs, you can find that tomato potato plant where you plant the plant, and when you finish harvesting your tomatoes, you've also got potatoes down underneath. They're close
Really?
enough. Yeah, they're close enough related that you can graft the tomato on top of a potato. Here in our area, I wouldn't recommend it because generally potatoes grow in the spring and they're finished by the time we plant the tomatoes. So you generally won't do that here, but in areas that have a shorter growing season, you might find some people that will plant a potato-tomato plant.
We've got a regular class here, botany class. I'm impressed. All right. The other aspect of planning for the fall season, anything else we need to think about?
I would just consider if you have already had a soil sample done and you've got low potassium or had low potassium at the time when that was taken, consider putting a little extra potassium, a little bit of potash on the soil to help any of those plants that you're trying to get through the winter season to make it through there a little bit better. For those people that have lawns that have had low potassium in their soil test report, now would be a good time to go ahead and put that potassium in order to get it through the
Even
wintertime.
for centipede.
Even centipede, because the potassium is not going to encourage top growth. Potassium is good for overall health of the plant,
And we want the roots.
and we want the roots to be really healthy. So putting that potassium down will help that plant be able to make it through with less winter injury.
Will it help my pennywort too?
Probably.
Oh, okay. Well, then forget that. We're talking with Sean Banks. Have they not come up for some solution to pennywort other than pulling it out and the problem is those roots go for
Ever. Yeah.
ever.
Yeah, there's not a permanent solution. If you want to get out there and have pennywort salad, get them the day that they come up. They taste green, but they're not really stringy green.
Okay. All right. Anything else as we're about to wrap it up with you?
That's all I had for today.
Okay. I want to thank Sean Banks again with the Carter Cooperative Extension Agency, and also the idea now that we've learned that tomatoes and potatoes, well, it's interesting, they both end with O, are nightshade. I didn't realize that. Sean, till next week. Thanks for being with us.
All right, thank you.